Is Audrey Marsh, for those who don't know. I'm Chair of St. John's Gift of Peace Committee. We're here today for the part 3 of our program, and it's entitled The Celebration. This is a follow-up to the first 2 programs, the conversation and the documentation. I want to point out here that although the conversation was a very personal event with small groups, last week's program was videoed, and this week's program will be videoed as well. And as soon as we've made arrangements with the library, those videos will be available, and I'll put an announcement in the newsletter for anybody who missed one or the other. You'll be able to catch up on the amazing programs. After learning at our workshops in April about how to have the conversation, many of us are currently discerning what our end-of-life wishes are, and we have had or are planning to have the conversation with loved ones as well as with our healthcare agent. Last Sunday, we received valuable information from an expert panel on how to document those end-of-life wishes and decisions. Today's program follows on that and consists of a second panel of 4 experts who will provide information about hospice. She's very alive and well here today. We all know she had an accident trying to get here last week, so she was wonderful enough to come in and present her program today. Funeral homes, funerals, and burials. Each panelist will speak for approximately 15 minutes, followed by a 10-minute question and answer session again. Because of the large number of people here today, we will ask again to respectfully request that questions for our panelists be generally helpful to you and our audience. If you have a highly specific question that's relevant only to you, please wait until after the end of the program and ask the speaker. They will be available. Thank you for your understanding. Anyone with a question is welcome to raise your hand, and we will bring a wireless microphone to you. Please note that there will not be a break in today's program, so feel free to get up and use the facilities or get a refreshment. At the end of the program, we will have numerous free handouts and printed resources available for you. Our speakers' materials will be on the chairs once again in front of you. And other resources will be on the 2 tables in the lobby. Each table will have the same resources so that you can form 2 lines and get out faster. Also, please pick up the free copies as you leave today. But we also ask, because this is the end of the program, and we've spent significant resources on duplicating handouts, we did not make a lot of extras for today. So if you received these handouts last week, unless you really need to pick up an extra 1 or 2 here and there for someone, just pick up the handouts that you don't already have, or the ones that you genuinely need. Not, we all go to these things and pick up every handout and then go home and put them in the trash a lot of times.
However, they can take the ones that they truly need and duplicate what we need.
No, and yes, we do want you to take handouts that you definitely need. And the books that we purchase, we definitely have plenty of those, comfort and consolation and things like that. Let's see. Also, I think that's it. There's plenty of food. If anybody would like seconds, please also go out and help yourself. And now I'm going to ask Father Jerry to get us started with an opening prayer.
You may not know this, but the team of people who have been working on this have really put their heart and soul into it. They've gone to other expositions like this to see what's being offered, and I couldn't be more grateful for all their hard work and all their organization, especially Audrey, because Audrey has been the chair of this team. I'm so delighted for their effort to simply assist us in getting material available for people in a thoughtful and well-prepared way. So, because the purpose of this conversation has to do with celebration, funerals, and situation of the body before and after burial, what I'd like to do, instead of just a straight prayer, I'd like to actually read from a memoir of a Catholic priest concerning a funeral for a sudden infant death that occurred at St. Philip and James Church. The funeral was there. It was in 1977 or 78. I happened to be there at the time. And you have to picture this. St. Philip and James Church was a new church that was started in the 1920s, because the old church on Charles Street, right across from the old, just down from Seton High School in North Charles General Hospital. Back then they still had the wards with the curtains dividing the beds and things in the hospital. So there was a small church, and they needed to build a much larger one, because back then Philip and James, before they built the cathedral, the new cathedral, Mary Our Queen, was one of the fastest growing and largest parishes in the archdiocese, and situated right on Charles Street near Loyola. You're probably maybe familiar with it. The church was immense. It had big pillars, and had you put two lions to the left and right of the entrance of the church, it would have looked like a courthouse. It was majestic enough. Into this vast interior space came a little casket no bigger than a loaf of bread. In order to accommodate, a church would seat 1,000. In order to try to give as much dignity and warmth as possible to the little casket, we actually put it right up in the sanctuary next to the altar. And what I'm going to read to you is Father Gallagher's accounting of his remembering of that moment. I present it at the beginning of this as a reminder that everything we're going to talk about has a particular reference to an individual experience. There's not one size fits all. And this will bring it out in a number of ways. This is a book called The Pain and the Privilege, the Diary of a City Priest, Joseph Gallagher. It says, May 10th, I celebrated my first Mass as a priest 24 years ago this month at the Church of St. Philip and James in mid-Baltimore. What he did in this book is he kept a record throughout his life of events that happened on particular days. And then he went through the whole year and collated some of them. So as he's in church, he's remembering that his first Mass was said 24 years ago this month. He says, 4 years ago, I offered my mother's funeral Mass here. Today, I went there a third time to offer a funeral Mass for the 6-week-old baby of my friends, the Wolozins. The tiny casket was placed on a table just in front of the altar. It was scarcely as big as the spray of spring flowers covering it. The young parish priest, Father Bowen, assisted me. I found it difficult to preach. I stressed that we were celebrating the miracle of caring, which is so courageous because events like sudden death can overtake the objects of caring. I spoke my belief that nothing dies, but something's born. Just before Holy Communion, as I spoke the prayer, Lamb of God, I glanced at the casket just in front of me and felt so deeply moved that I lost my voice for a while. Christine Julia, the baby, was buried in a country churchyard where Gina's grandparents have a lot. Her grandparents, in their 80s, were among the mourners. I noticed that a young child of theirs was buried near the freshly dug soil. When I asked the grandmother how old her baby was, I didn't realize that her memory had failed badly. I don't remember, she answered with a gentle smile. Later, I asked how the baby had died. She turned to her husband. What did the baby die from? This forgetting was almost as piercing as the many tears which Gina shed today. Let us pray. Grant, O Lord of life, that we may savor every season of our lives as a gift filled with promise for the future. Grant that we may lovingly accept your will and place ourselves each day in your merciful hands. And when the moment of our definitive passage comes, grant that we may face it with serenity, without regret for what we shall leave behind. For in meeting you, after having sought you for so long, we shall find once more every authentic good which we have known here on earth, in the company of all who have gone before us, marked with the sign of faith and hope and love. Mary, Mother of pilgrim humanity, pray for us, now and at the hour of our death. Keep us ever close to Christ, your beloved Son and our brother, the Lord of life and glory. Amen.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. I'm Ronnie Clark, and I'm a member of the Gift of Peace Committee. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you Lisa Stone. And I know Lisa Stone from Stella Maris, where we both work together. And Lisa Stone is a licensed nursing home administrator. And for the past 12 years, she has been the Senior Vice President of Outreach Services and the Director of the Inpatient Hospice Unit at Stella Maris, Inc. For the past 2 years, Ms. Stone has provided hospice education to Catholic churches across Maryland as part of its Enjoyful Hope series. She is a past board member of the Board of Examiners of Nursing Home Administrators. Ms. Stone is also a committee member and active member of Camp Me Too, an overnight grief and loss camp for children ages 7 to 14. And I was with Lisa at the very first Camp Me Too, and it was just wonderful. So we're very glad that Lisa is here in one piece today. And please welcome Lisa Stone.
Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you for inviting me back again Sunday. Last Sunday was a little challenging, but thank you for inviting me back. So today I'm going to speak about hospice. So what is hospice? Hospice is the model for quality, compassionate care for individuals facing a life-limiting illness. We focus on caring and not curing. And we provide expert pain management, spiritual care, emotional support, with our core belief that each of us has the right to die pain-free with dignity and compassion. And you'll hear me say frequently, at end of life, quality of life, dignity at end of life, always. So how is hospice initiated? Folks, you yourself can say, you know what, I've been going to the doctor, I'm tired, I don't know that I really want to continue with this treatment, I've tried multiple treatments, I've had multiple hospitalizations, and you may decide at that time you want to have that conversation, and you can have that conversation with a social worker, with a physician, your family, your priest. You can have that conversation with a nurse practitioner, so you can begin that talk. You know, what is it that I want to see while I'm facing this life-limiting illness? What are my steps? What are my next steps? I think the key is sometimes when folks will talk about palliative care medicine versus hospice. So in palliative care medicine, really it is dealing with a chronic disease that is not necessarily life-limiting. If you decide to elect your hospice benefits, 2 physicians must certify that you have less than 6 months to live if your disease takes its normal course. That does not mean that if you elect hospice that you only have 6 months or less to live. There are many individuals who have lived longer in hospice, and there are many individuals who have not. That's just what Medicare throws out there as a guideline. Versus palliative care, we're looking to manage you may have a chronic disease, and we're looking to manage your symptoms. So what are some of the core services in hospice? And I always like to talk about this because I think it's amazing what hospice offers and what it provides. Because not only does hospice care for the patient, we care for the family as well. And sometimes it's the family that needs more care than the patient, because we're looking at what happens after that family member dies. How do we help the family survive that loss? So core services: medical, nurse practitioners, nursing aides, volunteers, pastoral care, spiritual care, PT and OT. And I always like to talk about the therapy end of it, because the majority of hospice is provided in the home. And that means if the majority of hospice is provided in the home, who are the primary caregivers? You are, right? So you may not know how to provide all that care that needs to happen. So a therapist, we'll send our physical therapist out to the home to learn how to help a patient or a family member live the best quality of life that they can at end of life. We have families or patients in our hospice that maybe their goal really is, I want to get out of bed and I want to go to my back deck. Well, we want to make that happen, right? Quality of life at end of life. How do I live till the end of my life? And so we want to make sure that we are providing all of the support that you need to provide that care. There are different levels of hospice care. The majority of hospice, like I said, is provided in home, and that is called home hospice. However, if you are the primary caregiver, you are going to get tired most likely. And so hospice also offers what's called a respite service, which means that you can come into, your family member can come into a hospice unit for 5 days while we provide the care to the hospice patient, and you can relax and do what you need to do. Our volunteers are also a wonderful asset for our hospice families. If you are there providing care and your family member cannot be left alone, volunteers are invaluable. And in fact, Medicare mandates that hospice has volunteers. 5% of all of our services must be provided by volunteers in hospice, and that's any hospice. There's also what's called a short inpatient hospice stay. That's one of the units that I work at Stella. So that an inpatient unit stay is used for something when a patient's pain or nausea or vomiting or symptoms are really out of control and we cannot manage them in the home. And so we want to bring you into our inpatient unit, have those symptoms under control, and then hopefully return you back home again when those symptoms are managed. So where can hospice be provided? If 80% of all hospice care is provided at home, we already said that home, assisted living, nursing centers, group homes, we can really provide hospice anywhere. There's nothing to the benefit that mandates that we have to provide hospice in certain areas. We can really provide hospice in any location. I know last week that you heard conversation from Shannon about making sure that you have advance directives and really choosing who's going to make your decision. And I can only say in hospice that that is so true. At end of life brings up a lot of issues that are not always resolvable. We always say in hospice, everybody has skeletons in their closets, and some of us have cemeteries in our closet. And at end of life, our goal is to really bring peace to that family. And sometimes peace to that family truly means sitting at the bedside together. And you may walk away after that family member has passed away and never speak to each other again, but at that moment, we really are looking to give peace and solace to the person and the family at time of death. So how is hospice covered? Hospice is basically covered by Medicare. Makes sense. Most folks in hospice, or 85% of all hospice folks, die in hospice or age 65 years or older. But we also have a significant number of younger folks. And younger folks do have a different set of issues that come up than older folks. We have to worry about children, we have to worry about stepchildren, we have to worry about family. How do I survive after that? And in those instances, sometimes insurance does run out. So we talk about charity care. Every hospice must have charity care, and we are all mandated to help. So Stella reaches out to folks that are underinsured, and we have paid for mortgages, we have paid for health insurance benefits, we pay for rent, we pay for cremations. We want to make sure at end of life we give you peace of mind, and any hospice is mandated to have charity care. Can you change your mind? Absolutely. We are not here to force hospice on you. We are here to educate and tell you what to expect while you're in hospice. You have every right to revoke your hospice benefits and go back to curative treatment. Spirituality at end of life. So the beauty of hospice is really, again, meeting with the patient and the family and trying to bring some peace and solace at end of life. And we rely on our pastoral care and spiritual care support. Lots of times, or sometimes when someone really should not be still alive. and we'll go and we'll talk in our team meetings, and we'll say, you know what, I think there's some emotional or spiritual unrest. Let me bring the sisters in. Let me bring the priests in. Let me bring a family member in. Maybe it's as easy as saying, I forgive you, I love you. At end of life, those things are so important because sometimes that's all we need for that person to let go and really move on to the next life. But easier said than done, like I said, easier said than done. We don't always meet that goal, but that is what we want to do. So spiritual issues, reflecting on your relationship with God, reflecting on life choices, finding inner peace and comfort, relationships, sharing life stories, and what do I believe and how can I have hope. So even though you are in hospice, those are all items of quality life that we want to have. So quality of life at end of life, and you still live till your last breath. We really believe that. So a good death, if I asked everyone in here what a good death is, a good death to you is going to be something different. And a good death could be literally, like I said earlier, holding your hand of a brother or a sister that I haven't spoken to in 20 years. It could be giving forgiveness to a spouse who maybe was not the best spouse, or you forgive yourself for maybe things that you didn't do as best as you could. And so those are different items that we look at for that. And are my heart and my head together? We had a woman whose father was dying, and she said, Lisa, you know what? My heart is in the right place. I mean, my head is in the right place, but my heart hasn't caught up yet. I know my dad's going to die, but I'm not ready to let him go. And when she was ready to let him go, it was one of the most peaceful deaths for her and for him. So some hospice myths. Hospice will starve me and stop all my medications. We are so all about our food at end of life, and that I know is shocking. We are not looking to stop medications. We are not looking to stop food. We have more wine and beer on our hospice unit at Stella Maris than sometimes I think we have more of a cocktail hour at Stella than we do end of life. So no, we are all about honoring your wishes at end of life and really, again, quality of life at end of life. There will be a time, though, when we stop medications or we stop hydration and food because your body tells us that. It's not something we do arbitrarily. It's something that we talk with our medical staff with, and we talk about really what is happening with your individual family member. If hydration and food are hurting you and not doing you any good, then we may decrease it slowly, and ultimately we may stop it. But that's because your body can't accept it any longer, and it is doing more harm than good. And a lot of education goes with our families with that, because it's probably one of the hardest things for families to understand, because food is life, right? Medication-wise, same thing. If you are a diabetic, we are not stopping diabetic medicines. We are not stopping heart medicines. We are only stopping medications, again, when truly your body is telling us that you can no longer accept those medications. And our goal is to live life to the fullest, and fullest at end of life. So bereavement. So how can I go on when someone has died? You lose a spouse of 60 years, 40 years, whatever. You literally lose the left-hand side of your body. How do I get out of bed in the morning? How do I go shopping? How do I go to church? What do I do? You have children that lose siblings or parents. How do I know that it's okay to live or laugh again? And so under the hospice benefit, there's the counseling service programs that are available up to a year at no cost to anyone in your family. And we really want our family members to take advantage of it. It really is important. You don't realize the effect of a loss until it occurs to you. And don't let anyone tell you that you should be over it. Grief is your own personal loss and your own personal journey. And you need to really make you come out of that at the end. And it may take you longer, and you may never get over that person's loss, but you'll learn to live again, and you'll learn to have fun in life, and you'll learn to do what you need to do, but you will always feel the pain of that loss. In closing, our camp, Camp Me Too, which is where I was last week. So we are in our 7th year of camp, and we're going to show the video again, and I thank you for allowing me to show it. So I'm sorry if you've seen it once already, but it really is near and dear to our heart at Stella Maris. So we took 26 children, that's our 7th year, ages 7 to 14, to Camp Putak in Moncton, Maryland. We start on a Friday night and we end on Sunday, and we have 26 volunteers, a total of, each cabin has their own counselor. Ronnie knows, she's participated in it, and it is a way to help our children learn to know that it's okay to live again. Our children come to us angry, they come to us sad, they don't have the peer support, so when you're 7 years old, another 7-year-old can't possibly understand what it means to lose a father or a mother or a sibling. And our children have lost folks from many different reasons: addiction, car accidents, abuse, everything. And so how do we bring 26 children together that don't know anybody and come out on a Sunday feeling good? And it works. It is the miracle of people coming together to help our children. So bereavement, I really encourage you to take it, go to the grief counselors, know that you will be okay again. You will always feel that loss. But if we can go ahead, and I'll end with Camp Me Too. Yep. Mm-hmm.
To be humble, to be kind, it is a giving of the peace in your mind. To a stranger, to a friend, to give in such a way that has no end. We are loved, we are one, we are how we treat each other when the day is done. We are peace, we are war, we are how we treat each other and nothing more. And to be bold, to be brave, it is the thinking that the heart can still be saved, and the darkness can come quick. The danger's in the anger and in the hanging on to it. We are love, we are one, we are how we treat each other when the day is done. We are peace, we are war, we are how we treat each other, nothing more. And tell me what it is that you see, a world that's full of endless possibility, and heroes don't look like they used to, they look like you do. We are love, we are one, we are how we treat each other when the day is done. We are peace, we are war, we are how we treat each other, nothing more. We are how we treat each other, nothing more. We are how we treat each other.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes?
Yeah. I'm just a little confused about how Stella Maris and the hospice, all hospice, get most of their resources to carry on their work? I'm assuming that Medicare benefits to the patients or whatever come to you. Are there other sources of income or revenue for Stella Maris or other hospice? And is there any long-term care benefits? Do they come into play at all with Stella Maris or hospice?
Great question. So most hospices you're going to see do a lot of fundraising, because a lot of what's covered under the Medicare benefit, especially the requirements that we need, do not cover everything. So Stella Maris does a significant amount, as other hospices do, fundraising. We have a crab feast. Hospice of Chesapeake, I think, has a gala. Hooper House has a regatta. So we all do fundraising. In terms of your long-term care insurance policy, that really is how you wrote your long-term care insurance policy. Sometimes they do cover, most of them cover long-term care, personal care, but it's really based on the individual of how you wrote that policy.
Joe, I think there's somebody. No, Joe, let me take this first.
I've heard about Stella Maris, but I really don't know anything about it. Could you give us some background information of what Stella Maris is and how it, is it a Catholic organization? I'm not sure.
So Stella Maris is a Catholic organization, but for specific information, I can share that with you. But yes, we are a Catholic organization, and we've been around since 1953, and we are owned and run by the Sisters of Mercy and Mercy Health Services.
You mentioned Medicare.
Mm-hmm.
Is this under Part A? And what if you have a Medicare Advantage?
Good question, yes. So I am talking about Medicare Part A that you elect under your hospice benefit, but Medicare Advantage programs, typically if you are in a Medicare Advantage program and you elect hospice, most likely it will revert automatically back to your traditional Medicare, and commercial insurance will also cover hospice, as well as Medicaid and managed Medicaid.
Hold on one second. Wait a minute.
What if your U.S. federal government and this Medicare and Medicaid is just something they work into a formula? No, it's not, it doesn't have anything to do with you at all, except that it works into the formula.
I'm not sure what I mean, Medicare and Medicaid will cover it. And listen, if by chance it ends a life for Medicare, for hospice benefits, that's why we all have charitable funds. No one turns away anyone in hospice if you don't have a proper insurance. It's what we use our charitable funds for. So we never really worry at end of life about insurance, because that's what we use our charitable fund for. But Medicare will cover it.
Let's let Lisa
Yeah.
answer. Go ahead, Lisa.
So there's commercial insurance. So if you don't, so not everybody covers Medicare. Not everybody has Medicare. Not everyone has Medicaid, depending on how you worked in your life, whatever. But again, there's always commercial insurances, and then again, no worries because of the charitable funds that all hospices have.
Lisa, I have a question. How would you address people who are afraid to mention the option of hospice to loved ones because they think it means giving up hope?
Good question. You know what, in hospice we don't give up hope. And I think sometimes just having that, asking the person really, how are you feeling right now? Lots of times what we see on our end is that the patient themselves is ready to have the conversation much sooner than the family is. And so I think if you open that door to the family or to the patient and say, tell me, how are you feeling about your care right now? What do you view as your next steps based on what you've been told? And you will find that most patients are really more open and receptive. It's more the families that are really struggling to have that conversation.
Anybody else? Thank you, Lisa, so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker, Ms. Linda Witzke-Lewis. She is the funeral director for Harry W. Witzke's family funeral home in Ellicott City. She graduated from the Community College of Baltimore in 1989 with her degree in mortuary science. Ms. Witzke-Lewis is a fourth-generation funeral director and is also a licensed insurance agent. After taking some time off to raise her children, Ms. Witzke-Lewis returned to the funeral service several years ago. She currently resides in Catonsville with her husband of 26 years, who is also a funeral director. Their 2 daughters, 2 dogs, and 1 cat. And you will notice that we still have 1 typo in the bios out there. It says 2 cats. That's my fault. As a cat person, I decided I would take every opportunity to try to increase the numbers of cats in everyone's homes. Ms. Witzke.
Thank you. In addition to her saying about the 1 cat, we currently have 2 extra dogs because we are also foster parents. Just got them this past weekend. We'll have them probably for another week or 2. So depending upon the day of the year or the day of the week, we might have 4 or 5 dogs or cats at a time. So it gets a little crazy in our house. I wanted to talk a little bit to you about prearranging and also funerals and prepaying funeral arrangements. The one good thing about prepaying funerals is the fact that, or at least prearranging your funeral, is the fact that you are giving a gift to your family. They know exactly what you want. They know exactly, and if you decide you want to prepay, that financially it would not have the burden on your family. There used to be ways that, or there are 2 ways of prepaying funerals. The one is the way that we used to do it was in a trust, and it would be held at the bank. Currently, most funeral homes are doing funding through life insurance policies. This is specifically through a life insurance company that is made up for funerals and for cremations. You do not have to be pre-approved, and it is set solely for the funeral, like I said, and or cremation. The one good benefit about it is if you have to go on Medicaid and you do your spend down and you mark it as irrevocable through the life insurance policy, that the state cannot tell you that you have to cash out on your life insurance policy. Revocable means that you can cash out anytime. Irrevocable means that they cannot make you cash it out. So you know that money is set aside in funds for your funeral. And so that's one great thing that we think is good, because they normally will only allow you to have up to $1,500 of your money for a life insurance policy, or you will have to cash that out. That is included in the $2,500 that they will allow you in your money in a bank. So if you have a $15 life insurance policy, you're only allowed $10,000 in the bank. I do have, before I get off subject of that, I do have a brochure over there about Medicaid and prepaying, so this will give you what you can and cannot do as a guideline for anybody that will need to go on Medicaid for assistance. One of the things I wanted to touch on is the difference between corporate and family-owned funeral homes. We are a family-owned funeral home at Harry Witzke Funeral Home. Mr. Harry Sr. started it in 1912, my great-grandfather, down in Baltimore City. And then Harry opened up his own place in 1960, and it's currently run by his wife and his daughter. Corporate-owned funeral homes usually are more expensive because they have their stocks, shareholders, and they have a lot more requirements. Family-owned funeral homes, whether it's us or any other family-owned funeral homes, are much more reasonable. I would like to say to you that if you decide you want to prepay or prearrange your funeral, that you call a couple different funeral homes, ask for their general price list. We are required by law to give it to you. We can mail it to you. You can stop in and get one, but do a little bit of homework if you want. We do have our prices online, which is rare. but you can go onto our website and you can see, and it has everything itemized along with our caskets and our vaults and pictures of our prayer cards and all that stuff, just to give you a feel of what you might need. I also want to let you know we do handle services for all religions. And with making pre-arrangements, a lot of people nowadays are going towards cremation. If you pre-arrange your funeral, whether you just want to come in and give us statistical information so we have it in our files, you can pre-authorize for your own cremation. That's a good thing because if your children are out of state at the time of your death, or if you are not on speaking terms, unfortunately we see that sometimes with some of your children, we need to get a majority of the children to sign the authorization, if not all of them, for the cremation. Sometimes that delays the cremation. So it's nice to be able to see in writing that you want to have cremation. A lot of people come to me and tell me, well, I'm power of attorney for my father. Power of attorney ends at death. So any of the authority that you had for making decisions, you don't have anymore. If you do have power of attorney, I suggest strongly that you would make sure it's listed somewhere, that it is power of attorney not just for medical or for financial, but also for final disposition of the person. That way it continues through to the funeral as well. Again, a lot of people are not aware of that. Cremation, a lot of people think of just a direct cremation, immediate cremation, nothing else. Cremation is a lot of options. You can have a traditional service, just like a regular funeral service, with the body present for a viewing, go to church, have the mass, or have a service at church, and then cremation will follow. Cremation is really just the instead of burial. It's not just instead of a funeral. A funeral is a celebration of life. It gives the family closure to be able to say their goodbyes. And it is very important. A lot of people say, well, I don't want them to have to go through that. But it is a good closure for the family. Other options are, even if you just had a visit viewing, and then the cremation to follow memorial service later. You could have that as well. So there are several different options for cremation that are available. You could even decide, okay, I really don't want a viewing, I want a direct cremation. You could have a memorial visitation where family just gathers, family and friends gather to give you support with the memorial service to follow on that as well. So I just don't want you to have blinders on and think there's just one way for a cremation. Yes, ma'am, we do. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am, I've been there a couple of times personally myself. So yes, we do. Just looking at my notes real quick, I'm sorry. Oh, as far as somebody had asked earlier to me about donating your body. If you want to donate your body to the anatomy board, you have to be signed up yourself before you die, or the anatomy board will not take the donation. So you would reach out to the anatomy board, fill out your paperwork that you want, authorizing it. If your family wants to have your cremated remains back to you, they will be given back. Otherwise, the cremated remains will be buried, and the anatomy board will take care of that. There's also the anatomy gift registry that will take donation of bodies. Or if you just want to donate your organs, then I would suggest that you follow through with a DMV and put that on as being an organ donor. And donating your body, your organs and your eyes, your skin and bones have to be done within 24 hours. For your organs, you have to be on life support to be able to have the organs be viable for a donation. And other than that, that is pretty much what I have for you. Does anybody have any questions, I guess, at this time?
My mom paid for her, my mother paid for her funeral many years ago, and I paid for mine in 2013, and it is the best thing you can do. It really, truly is.
Oh, I did want to say too, real quick, this pamphlet I have over there talks about cremation and the different options available. This other one talks about the pre-planning and the fact Again, if you pay at today's price and you live another 20, 30 years, it's guaranteed at today's price. So then you don't have to worry. Otherwise, your children at the time will have to come up with the money, and sometimes not all the funds are available. We also have this little thing. Unfortunately, I cannot stay till the end to answer individual questions. I do have to get back to the funeral home because I do have some families that I am currently working with that are waiting for me. But I did have some of these printed up for you. If you wanted additional information, just fill out your name, and down bottom it asks about what specific information you want. If you just want to talk to me over the phone or come in and chat with me, I'd be glad to answer them either way, and just drop it in the mailbox. And then finally, this is a pre-planning guide for you, whether you come into the funeral home or you just want to keep it in a safe place for yourself. It talks about all the statistical information that you will need for the death certificate and your wishes for your funeral. This one is general, and then the other one with the red line across the top is for veterans, just to let you know.
Do you handle, do I have to stand? I can stand. Do you handle bodies without doing embalming?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you handle like green burials? I know there's a green burial society in Maryland. Are you a part of that?
I am personally not a part of it. I'm sure that if you wanted a green burial, we could look into it and see what we could do for it. As far as embalming, embalming is not required by law. So if you do not want embalming, we will not embalm. The only time embalming is required is when the family requests visitation or a viewing of the body. And then the funeral homes usually request it for sanitation and preservation reasons. Sure.
You had mentioned something about life insurance or an insurance policy.
Yes.
Is it a separate, say if you have life insurance now, is that something that you can attach to the current policy, or do you have to get another policy?
You would need to get one that's specifically for funerals, and so it would not be attached. Yours, it would not guarantee a funeral. If you want it guaranteed, you can assign a funeral home for that policy, but it would not guarantee our cost.
But I could get one through.
Through us?
Yes.
Ourselves or any other funeral home. Hopefully you'll choose us, but I don't want you to think I'm trying to sell our funeral home. So
No. Oh, okay, thank you.
I'm not up here to, I just want to make sure that you guys are knowledgeable. I also want to mention with the life insurance policy, there's a couple great benefits about it. One is the way that I said that we used to trust funds. We would open up an account in the bank under your name, so then you were, any interest or whatever, you would be taxed every year for that. Life insurance policy, you are not taxed for it, so that's one good benefit. Another benefit is the life insurance policy is portable. You are the owner. You are the owner and the applicant. You can list whoever you want to as the beneficiary. If you decide tomorrow you want to move to Florida or California, you take that policy with you, and then you can walk into that funeral home, wherever that is, and hand them the policy. It's not going to be guaranteeing their prices for what our prices are, because every funeral home has different prices, but you are accruing interest in that policy, so that'll help, hopefully, to offset any price, but it doesn't bind you to us.
You just spoke of prices. Can you give us a ballpark figure of what funerals cost these days?
Sure. I would say for immediate cremation, it would be about $3,000 to $3,500. For a burial with a casket and a vault would be about $8,000 to $10,000. It really depends. It could be even less. It just depends on what you choose. That's why I suggest about going on our website if you have a chance. We don't do packages. Some funeral homes do packages, so you're locked into everything that they have in that package. If you don't want a certain thing, you're paying for it anyway. We let you pick and choose as far as what you want. So if you don't want a register book for people to sign, you don't have to buy one. If you don't want prayer cards, you don't have to buy those. There are certain things like our services that would be provided or embalming. If you're going to have a viewing that's not, you can't say, well, I opt out on the embalming. Also, the caskets range in price. So our least expensive one is about $1,000, and then they go up to about $4,000 at our funeral home. And then the vaults and urns are different prices as well. So pictures of them are online, the vaults and the pictures of the caskets and urns are online with the pricing.
Would you arrange for the cemetery through your
Yes, ma'am.
funeral home?
We would contact the cemetery. When you contact us, we would contact the cemetery and schedule the interment. You would still need to go to the cemetery to pay for the opening and closing if it was not paid for, and you also have to sign the authorization for opening the grave. But we will contact them for you and schedule that. We will contact the church or a minister or priest that you would want. If you wanted to have prayers at the funeral home, we would contact the minister, we would contact a deacon to come in for you. So we could schedule all of that. We would put notice in the newspaper on your behalf. We would get the death certificates on your behalf for you, the certified copies.
If you wanted to be buried out of state, what problems does that present? How does the body get from Maryland to the cemetery plot where you have out of state?
Okay. It doesn't really give any problems. It might delay it a little bit as far as the services, but we would contact, if it's out of state, us being licensed, me being licensed, I'm only licensed in the state of Maryland. So let's say I have to go to Pennsylvania. I would drive the body up to Pennsylvania for the services. If it's just going to be services here and then a graveside service in Pennsylvania, we would contact the cemetery. We would need to contact the local funeral home to cover our license, our mortician's license at the cemetery. They would just stand there just to have the license available if needed, in case the state board comes in and questions why we're there and we're not supposed to be. Other than that, we could handle everything for you. If it was going out of state to California or more of a distance that isn't feasible for driving, then we would go ahead and coordinate the airlines, and we would take you down to the airport, and we would contact the funeral home in that city and coordinate it with them as far as getting the body over there.
Thank you.
Sure.
You mentioned different denominations, Jewish too, I noticed, because
Yes.
there's some funeral homes just do, like Sal Levinson as an example.
Right.
But you do all.
Yes, we have had Jewish services at our funeral home, yes, sir.
If you choose cremation, is there a ceremony or a witness to the cremation that the family does? And if you choose cremation, do you have to have your remains buried in a cemetery?
As far as having your remains buried in a cemetery, you do not have to have them buried in a cemetery. I know with the Catholic belief, they would like them buried in the cemetery, because they can sit, and they would like to keep the cremated remains all together intact, because they feel that it's still the body as a whole, and they would like to have it buried as soon as possible. If you're a Protestant and you're not Catholic, then they are keepsakes that are available, that if some of your children would want little keepsakes of the cremated remains, or if you want to keep the urn at home, there is no regulation as far as whether or not you can do that. So you'd be fine to keep it at home. It doesn't have to be buried. Now, as far as taking the ashes and scattering them, there are laws in the state of Maryland. Scattering cremated remains wherever you want to is not allowed by law. It's considered a nuisance if you do it in a public area. So you can scatter them on private property, but not there. You can also scatter them in the water, but you have to be so many nautical miles away from the beaches and such. And that's no place in the Chesapeake Bay that allows you to do that is that far away. But there is somebody that is licensed that you would pay them to take you out on their boat to be able to scatter in the ocean, in the bay.
Linda, I think there was a second part of the question about a service related to cremation.
Oh, yes. So as far as the services go...
Or witnessing cremation.
Right. As far as the services go, because you did mention that, that would be the memorial service or a funeral service, whether you had it before or after cremation. You can witness a cremation. Witnessing, pretty much all you're doing is you are watching the body go into the retort at the crematory, but you're not witnessing the entire cremation process. The entire cremation process takes about 4 hours from beginning to end. So the witnessing parts may be about a 10 to 15-minute time frame, and there is an additional charge from the crematory for the witnessing.
Well, Natalie, I think that might be a question for Gate of Heaven. I mean, Gate of Heaven, in terms of their witnessing and their personnel, maybe you could contact Gate of Heaven. That's a specific question about Gate of Heaven. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other questions?
Could you explain?
Oh, sorry. Here's
Could you explain what you meant by if you were an organ donor, you had to be on life support?
Because they want to make sure that the organs are viable. If you die at home and then you're not on life support, that your body has shut down and they're not going to be active, that viable for them to be used for, as far as donating for another body, for kidneys and such like that. Or if you die, now if you're in a car crash and you are taken to the hospital and you're in life support, then they can still use the organs, but if not, then you can't. You could be brain dead if you're on life support. Or if you're on life support so pretty much if you're brain dead on life support and you haven't woken up and your family's decided to, as they say, pull the plug, then that's when they would step in if you wanted to be an organ donor.
Okay. Would you accept a casket that's biodegradable as part of green burial?
Again, I haven't really handled any green burials, but I'd be glad to look into it. We do accept, all kinds of caskets, and I would have to check, I'm sure the cemetery, if you said that there's a specific cemetery that you know of, or is it just the society that you said was a green burial society? Okay, right. So we would work with the cemetery with whatever, they regulate for, and we would accept a casket, or we could find one for you, sure.
I had heard that the Catholic Church allowed cremation, but you had to be buried afterwards. It's not possible to have the ashes scattered. Is that correct?
That is what is preferred, and I'm sure Father would be glad to chime in on that one, but that is what is preferred.
I'd be happy to get to that when we discuss that. You got to bear in mind that there's preferences that the church has, okay, and then there's life. Preferences, you marry once. That's a preference in the church. Strong teaching. However, life does not always allow people to, accommodate themselves to the ideal. There are no, as far as I know, there are no cremains police that will come out of the Catholic Vatican and try to find out what you did with Uncle Harry or Aunt May. So when it comes to my part, I'd be happy to discuss what the actual practices are and how it relates to what the church prefers.
Thank you.
But what she said is as accurate. The preference of the church is that you don't separate the ashes, you don't scatter them, you don't, that they remain intact in the same vessel. But there are reasons for that. And as we'll see, the church used to not allow cremation at all. So we have to allow for the fact that there's a progression that perhaps the church is not caught up to yet, but which is happening with families. And what happens with families in terms of their religious practice and the practices that are associated with grief, mourning, and the remedy of loss, those things eventually find their way into church practice. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
I'd rather that come from the horse's mouth, so thank you, Father.
Yeah. Also, just...
Thank you, everyone.
And I am one of the committee members on St. John's Gift of Peace Committee. And I am here to introduce Eileen May Kiefer. She is the Resurrection Ministry Coordinator of St. John the Evangelist Roman Catholic Parish here in Columbia. She has been a member of this parish for over 40 years. Ms. Kiefer graduated from the College of Notre Dame in Baltimore with a BA degree in psychology. She attended a 2-year archdiocesan program entitled To Be Church Together. Eileen has participated in a variety of ministries for St. John's, including liturgy and marriage preparation, and has been involved with our resurrection ministry for 25 years, both as a St. John's staff member and also as a volunteer. And while on the staff, she developed a parish booklet for families to help them prepare for a funeral or a memorial mass. Eileen comes from a family of funeral directors. Her father, sister, brother, and now her daughter. Growing up in a funeral home provided Eileen with the privilege of being with families during very difficult times. She brings her experience from her upbringing and her adult faith experience to her continuing commitment to St. John's Resurrection Ministry. Eileen?
Thanks, Joe. Here at St. John's, we have a group of volunteers known as the Resurrection Team. We are volunteers who wish to support families when they are facing a difficult time. I am on that team and here today to talk about what St. John's offers families. What I decided to do is I'm going to present to you the process that we use when we meet with a family to plan the funeral or memorial mass. A member of the Resurrection Team meets with the family to discuss their options, and other team members come early on the day of the funeral and set up for the mass and have everything in place and to be there as a support for families. So, the parish office is the first to find out who needs us, and that call will come either from the family or from the funeral director. Whichever, if you're connected to the church and you've been in touch with the priest, and we may know before the funeral director knows. Sometimes the family asks us, who do we suggest? And we do talk about the difference, as Linda just talked about, the corporate-owned funeral homes and the family-owned funeral homes. But then it's up to the family to decide who they would like to have. So then the date and the time of the funeral is established as to the availability of St. John's and to the availability of the funeral director. If you're choosing a daily mass, Monday through Friday, we invite families to share that funeral experience, that mass with their faith community, and to do it at the daily noon mass here. The families that we know that have done that have appreciated having that connection with their faith community at the time of the funeral. It can be done earlier in the day as long as we have a priest available, and then on Saturday, obviously, anytime as long as a priest is available and the room is available. And you may request a particular priest if you choose, or if you have a family member or friend who you would like to ask to do the mass, that's fine. After all of that is established, then the parish office sends out an email to the Resurrection Team, and we receive that information and respond saying, yes, I'm available, no, I'm not available. As soon as it's established who is available, that person calls the family and sets up a time and day as to meet to discuss the mass. We meet either here at the office, or we offer to go to the house if that's more convenient for the family. Sorry. I do this all the time, and now I'm nervous, but I'm used to sitting here. We can discuss all the questions after the presentation, if that is okay with you. You can, if you would like to have the wake, you can have it here at church, If that is convenient for you or more comfortable for you, we work that out with the funeral home. The room obviously cannot be booked for another service of any kind, but if it's available, you're welcome to have your wake service here. Then you have the Mass. So if it's a funeral, here, now I don't have to read. Okay. The Mass, when it comes, and you're coming from the funeral home, the funeral director will bring the casket and bring the person here. You have the option of processing in with the funeral director, the casket, the priest, or you can be seated and they come in, whichever you prefer to have done. And Mass, Father will welcome everybody, Mass will start, he'll do an opening prayer, and then you have the opportunity of placing the pall on the casket. The pall is a large white cloth, sign of resurrection, connects back to our baptismal robe. You need 2 people to do that. There are a lot of choices that you have in doing the funeral Mass itself. If you have an urn, if it was a cremation, we will have a table in front of the altar and the urn will be on the table. We also have a small pall, small cloth to cover the urn. And as Father just said a few minutes ago, years ago we weren't allowed to cremate, and now we not only cremate, the cremation are here, and we have a pall for the urn. I mean, that's how far we've come that way. So then they place the pall on either the casket or the urn, and they go back to their seat. We have an opening hymn, and then we begin the readings. Father will say, please be seated as we listen to God's word, and Mass goes on. You have the choice of readings. You get to choose the gospel that Father's going to read. You have the opportunity to have family members involved to do the readings. That's an Old Testament reading and a New Testament reading. They're the choices. You can't do a poem or something else or 2 New Testament readings. It has to be Old Testament, New Testament. Father will do the gospel and do a homily, and then the general intercessions. It's Mass. But you get to choose the intercessions. You get to choose them. You can write them if you want, or we have a book that gives you choices, selection. And you can have one person do all of the readings, or you can have a variety of people do readings. The general intercessions, you can have one person do one intercession at a time, depending on how many people you have and how many people you want to have included in the Mass. Normally, we do here at St. John's open up our intercessions at Mass for congregation to participate. We do not do that at the funerals. I don't believe we even do it at the weddings. It's just the daily Mass, congregational Mass. And then after the general intercessions is the offertory and an offertory hymn. You have the opportunity to have at least 2 people come and get the pitcher of wine and the bowl for the host. You can have more than those 2 people. You can have the neighborhood, you can have the 13 grandchildren, but just 2 people will have something in their hand. Everybody else can walk up to the priest, hand them the wine and the host, and then they go back to their seats. And the Mass goes on, it's the same. And the other opportunity that you have would be if you have family members or friends who are Eucharistic ministers and would like to serve, they're more than welcome. We just need to know that ahead of time, which is done during the course of the planning. And then communion, they come up and we have communion, and then you have the communion hymn, and you have the opportunity of maybe having a meditation hymn if you choose. There's also the time for a eulogy if you want to do that, and then the final blessing and the final hymn. So the booklet that I have been referring to is this resurrection booklet based on choices for Catholic funeral and memorial Mass, and the choices that are available at St. John's Catholic Church, and some of them are unique to St. John's. This book is 36 pages long, so I did not make copies of it. I do have a brief outline for a handout, but in the outline is a link to St. John's, and you can read it online, okay? the family does receive this book, and we go through it. Now, depending on the time frame, you can make the decisions right then and there when you're sitting, for an hour or half hour, whatever it takes for you to go through the readings, say, yes, I want this. Other people, it takes them a longer time. And if they have the time, they can take the book home. Well, they can take it home anyway, but they can take the book home. Maybe somebody else who couldn't make the meeting, they want to be involved in the decision-making. So sit over at the kitchen table and have your cup of tea and give me a call the next day. As long as we have the time to do that, because we need to know, especially if you're going to have a program printed, we need to be able to put things together. So that's that. So the choices that a family have: where to have your wake, the date and time of your Mass, who's going to do the Mass, are you going to process into church or are you not going to process into church, who places the pall on the casket or the urn. You have 4 hymns that you need to choose: opening, offertory, communion, and closing hymn, and the option of the meditation hymn, but the other 4 are not option. Then you decide the Old Testament, New Testament readings, the Gospel, and the general intercessions. And again, they are all here. There's a number of the readings. I do have the text. I didn't do all of them, so after I did some, I did citations for additionals if you want to look them up. Or if you have one that's particularly special to you, certainly we can use that also. You're not limited to this. The general intercessions are in the back. They're divided into 5 categories. You'll see it, and you make one choice from each of those categories. And again, if you want to personalize it, that's fine. If you want to put it down and write your own, that's okay too. But I need to see them, and we need to be sure that they make sense to read. We offer a time frame for a eulogy. I would say we request and strongly suggest that it not be spontaneous so much, but prepared words that would be said. Thank you. The program. We do offer to do a program, but as I said, we need to have your decisions of what the readings are and who. If you want names put in the program, we need to have that information. And that should be done at least 24 hours, maybe 36 hours before the time of the funeral Mass, just because of the logistics in the office and having it in place for you. And this isn't directly connected, but we do have the opportunity, if it's available, for a luncheon in room 4 across the hall. If the room is available, we offer the room to you, and then you go from there. We have a couple of caterers with names and phone numbers if you want, and then hopefully, that might be helpful. And Linda, I forget if it was Lisa or Linda, one of you talked about bereavement. You did. We do also reach out to the family sometime about a week or so after the funeral, and send a card and offer any kind of support and open the door for them if there's anything more that St. John's can do for them. I think that's it, folks.
Joe, take the microphone up, please.
Joe's got the microphone.
I guess I used the word wake. There's different terms, wake, viewing, and where that is either here or at the funeral home. Whether it's an open or closed casket, that's something else to discuss with the funeral director. That doesn't have anything to do with us, per se.
Can there be a Catholic funeral without a Mass?
I don't know what that, we could do a Catholic prayer service.
Prayer service.
Sure,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. We would want to do whatever is going to help give comfort to the family. So yes, if they don't want Mass and we want to do, they request a prayer service, absolutely.
I just want to say Eileen was most helpful when
Hold
my
it very
husband...
close, please.
Oh, Eileen was most helpful when my husband died. She's very kind, caring, and very patient. She's a godsend. I think if I should pass away and she's on vacation, my kids will hold my ashes until she returns because she's the only one that can really help them. So she's just wonderful, and she's a blessing to our parish. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely, yes. In fact, we do have a file in the office of people that have done their request for their funeral service, yes. And that helps, especially like funeral arrangements and all. It just makes it easier for your children or whoever it is that needs to. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
The question was, I forgot.
Can you
it.
pre-plan?
Can you pre-do it? Can you pre-do your wishes for what you want for your funeral? And the answer is yes.
Another question? Yeah.
Is there a fee for us to hold a wake in church?
The parish fee for the funeral, and it is across the board, all-encompassing, musicians, everything, is $450. And that's if you have a room or whatever, that's the cost. It's a flat fee. But again, but we would certainly, if there are circumstances, and sometimes the funeral director will incorporate that into their bill. So just be sure when you know about that you find out from the funeral director, because a lot of the funeral directors will have relationships with the churches, and they just automatically incorporate it in their bill. So either way is fine with us.
I just want to say that on many occasions we have buried people and have returned whatever donations they have made to the church back to them based upon our understanding of what their particular need has been. In other situations, we've also worked with the funeral home. I'm sorry that Linda isn't here, in order to provide the capacity for a family to have the necessary rituals of viewing the body, having the body embalmed and dressed, things like that. So the cost is only relative to what the tradition is with regard to. We may as well say, how much does a wedding cost in the church, or how much does a baptism cost? They really don't cost anything, but the tradition is that certain monies are put forward. In the funeral case, most of that money is to provide for the pianist and the soloist or organist. There's a donation to the church and a donation to the priest. The same thing is true for weddings. But in weddings, because the church is a structure that may have an awful lot of weddings, and people's own wedding might cost $29,000, many churches with a beautiful church will actually use the wedding fee as a way of providing for the maintenance of the building, the air conditioning, the lighting, the cleaning, the things like that. So it would not be unusual if you were going to a church, a wedding would cost you $800. Is that the flat fee? No, it's what they happen to charge. If it's at the Cathedral of Mary Queen, it's probably $3,000, But so just so you realize that all of this is, of course, amenable to whatever the usual circumstance is.
It's always the question I don't like to answer.
Pardon me?
Thank you so much, Eileen.
I'm sorry?
Thank you.
Able to prepay the cost. I don't know that we've ever had that done.
Thank you, Eileen. The Reverend Gerard Bowen is pastor here at St. John's. A Catholic priest, he was ordained in 1977 for parish ministry in the Archdiocese of Baltimore. Since 1990, Father Jerry has been actively involved with death, education, and bereavement ministry. The conferences, seminars, and workshops he has attended in seeking best practices in the issues of complicated grieving and care have been the Carondelet Management Institute Conference on the Grieving Process, the International Conference on Children and Death at King's College in London, Ontario, the Second International Conference on Children and Death at the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, the 11th International Conference on Ethical Issues in the Care of the Dying, the Aged, and the Bereaved, and friends in Chicago, Illinois, the National Teleconference Living with Grief, Personally and Professionally, sponsored by Shock Trauma, the University of Maryland Medical Center, the Shepherd Pratt Conference Center on What Death Teaches Us About Life, sponsored by the Maryland State Funeral Directors Association, the 12th International Conference on Helping the Bereaved Male at King's College in London, Ontario, the Second National Conference on Spiritual Care and Hospice at St. Louis, Missouri, the National Teleconference on Mourning Children, Children Mourning, sponsored by the Hospice of Washington County in Hagerstown, Maryland, the International Conference on Helping Children Cope with Death at King's College in London, Ontario, the National Teleconference on Living with Grief After Sudden Loss, sponsored by the Hospice Foundation of America in Hagerstown, Maryland, the World Gathering on Bereavement, the Language of Grief, Threads That Connect in Seattle, Washington, and the World Gathering on Bereavement in Columbus, Ohio. Father Jerry acknowledges that the best teachers in grief ministry have been those who have experienced it most deeply and know it the most intimately, the parishioners who carry these crosses. His 40-year ministry with them has been both before, during, and after the loss of a loved one in all kinds of situations: sudden death, murders, suicides, drunk drivers, accidents, miscarriage, stillbirths, SIDS, terminal illnesses. As Father says, we are all humbled by their faith and ask for their prayers as we keep them daily in ours. Please welcome our pastor, Father Jerry.
I'm not being paid to give this talk. Do you remember the story about a woman that called up Monsignor one, this is an old story in the church. I hope you allow me to tell it to you, even though it's such a serious topic that we're having. And she called him up and said, "Monsignor, I wonder if you would come to the house, please, and, say some prayers. One of my family is sick." He says, "Certainly, I'd be happy to come." And he says, "What's your family member's name?" He says, "Skippy." And he says, "Skippy?" She says, it's my dog." And he says, "I'll be saying a prayer for you, my dear, but I don't know that I can come to the house and bless the dog." She says, "Okay, I understand." And then she calls and says, "Monsignor, I wonder if you could come and, do a funeral for me." He says, "I'd be happy to. What's happened? Who's died?" She says, "Well, remember Skippy?" And he says, I'm sorry. I said, I'm really not able. I would like to help you, but the church sacraments are for baptized Christians. And I just don't think that, the church would allow it." She says, "Oh, that's too bad. The dog meant so much to me." He says, "I'm sure it did." She says, "And I really want to honor its life." "Oh, but of course you do." She says, and if we had a nice service, I was prepared to give $2,000 to the church." And he says, "Why didn't you tell me the dog was Catholic?" Part of this illustrates some of the questions that we've had is that there's often a disconnect between what's written down, like regulations, rules, guidelines, and what happens in life. And the church actually acknowledges this in its code of canon law, believe it or not. The Code of Canon Law is meant to help know the rights and obligations of the faithful, to protect them, to elicit them, and to encourage people to participate in them. That's why you have things like marriage law. You also have law with regard to the right for the sacraments, baptism, confirmation, weddings, funerals. But then there also is the acknowledgement. It's called epikeia. And it says that, well, let me read it to you. That'd be the best way of doing it. It says it addresses the impossibility of any one law. Did I leave that over there? Oh, well. It addresses the impossibility of any legislation being written so perfectly that it can account for every and all circumstance. And this is it, thank you. It's a concept of law that says the premise is the legislator cannot take into account every individual human circumstance. So epikeia has to refer to the spirit of the law, the reason why the law was written. The legislator cannot take into account every individual human circumstance. Yet the applicability of a particular law to a particular individual should take into account the exact circumstances of that individual at that time. The concept of epikeia is that the legislator would conclude, were he aware of these individual circumstances, that the law would not apply in that particular case or would not apply in all its provisions. The Italians actually have a great way of saying this. The Italians, I can't tell you what it is in Italian, but they say there's the law, then there's my case. There's the law, then there's my case. So I would like to say how this applies in the church. First of all, I should probably let you know why I took it upon myself to take the time to travel to different parts of the country and the world to try to understand more about bereavement and grief and consolation and counseling and healing and ritual. It's because as I was in the seminary, we had a lot of practicums based on the rituals of the Mass. The ritual of hearing confession, the ritual of doing a wedding, the ritual of doing a baptism, the ritual of doing a funeral Mass. But there also were other events that came into play when people came into church for these rituals. The same thing was true with regard to counseling. We had a lot of psychology. We had a lot of counseling courses. But we really weren't in the seminary at a time when death and dying was being taught and bereavement and grieving ministry was being taught. That was just coming out. Remember Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on death and dying. So what I found is what I had in my toolbox was simply the expressions of consolation that I'd heard from other people or the things that I'd seen in my family. And I didn't realize that these actually were not very helpful and often, not only did not help the person, but they weren't innocuous. They actually hurt. For instance, someone saying to a person who's just lost their child and they're a young parent, oh, you'll have another child one day. It's well-intentioned. It doesn't cover the moment. I can tell you my mom had a miscarriage before me, a miscarriage after me. And that has affected her life permanently because of her going through that as a very, very young mom. Our whole attitudes towards death and dying evolves over time. And recently, we've been in kind of a vacuum in terms of how do we reach out to those who are in grief. During the Second World War, you knew what had happened to a family if there was a gold star in the window, Gold Star moms. And at different times at the turn of the century, two turns of the century ago, you wore black for an extended period of time, you draped your house door in black, you wore an armband in black. And so it was a way when you're stepping out into the world, someone is able to say, this person needs special care. And those things have kind of eluded us. So I found when I was in my third parish, this was in 1988, the tradition was that if a family member was having a problem, and this could be anybody, I mean, it wasn't unusual back then for people to bring their children in to have the priest talk to them. I don't think I've ever had that happen in the last 30 years, by the way. But there was a time when that would happen. So likewise, they would say, Mom hasn't been right since Dad passed, and it's been some months now. We're worried about her. Would you go and talk to her? So I went to talk with Mom, this particular mom of this particular family. And they were concerned that she didn't want to leave the house. Even when they would pick her up to take her out, she would have a panic attack and have to go back into the house. And so the idea was that I would go and sort of talk her back into life, into, getting outside in the world again. After my first conversation with her, the son called me up and said, Father, I'd like to thank you for going to see Mom. I said, you're welcome. He says, I don't think you'll need to go see her again. And it wasn't because I had solved the situation. It's because I was no help whatsoever and simply just irritated her. And so then I realized that I didn't know what I was talking about. We also have a lack in our own experience, humanly speaking, because people live longer. I can remember, and death has become sanitized and distant from us. I can remember as a child walking into my grandparents' living room and there was great-grandpa laid out in the parlor. And families would have often the experience of losing someone, as a regular part of their family experience. I think in colonial times you didn't really name a child until after a certain time had passed by because you weren't sure if the child would live, would survive. And today you can have members who are 30, 40, 50 years old and have not experienced a death. And so there's been, for these practical reasons, a need to connect ritual or regulations with individual circumstances. I've got some questions here that were written down. I'm going to try to do them in order. But that's one reason why you have to understand that the church is a living, breathing body. And its rituals are meant to lead people to God like its laws. And in time, those rituals, those ways of expressing a relationship between God and his people change, alter. Do you remember a time where you were not allowed to go into a non-Catholic church? Yes. You probably remember a time where if you were Catholic and your girlfriend was not Catholic or your boyfriend was not Catholic, and they said, would you be in my wedding reception? Would you be in my wedding? And you were to be a groomsman or a bridesmaid, you would have to say no. You would have to say no. The church did say that, well, if there was a funeral and you were invited to go to the funeral in a non-Catholic church, you could go, because otherwise you might give bad example or harm the family. But if you went, you couldn't pray. Which meant you didn't participate in the rites of a non-Catholic service. Well, now we have interdenominational services and ecumenical services, but you can remember how that stuff has changed. Remember when, if you were married, you weren't supposed to marry a non-Catholic. If you did, where did you get married? The rectory. The rectory, that's right. And often rectories were built with the dividable walls between the dining room and the parlor, so it could be opened up and the bride would come down the staircase, and then we'd have the wedding there because you couldn't be married in church. You know what the reason was? Not to expose the sacred mysteries to pagans, to non-believers, as if God needs some protection from the rest of the people in the world. Well, that began to change, and then what happened is not only could you be married in the church rather than a rectory, but you had to be married outside the altar rail. Then you could be married inside the altar rail. And then it came to a time where you could be married in the non-Catholic church of your spouse who was not Catholic, in order to acknowledge the close relationship of the spouse who's not Catholic with their preacher or minister, to help to provide for family harmony. And the priest who's Catholic could attend that service and witness to your getting married in a non-Catholic service, and he would be there, maybe offer a prayer or something. So these things have changed. I can well remember, and what makes them change? I can well remember a funeral. I was, this was my third parish. The other one was the fourth parish, my third parish. I've had the great blessing to minister in Howard County, Anne Arundel County, Baltimore City. And each parish is a little different. And customs often are a little different too. Anyway, this is a typical blue-collar, working-class parish, and there was a man who died who was well known as a pillar of the community. I mean, he was there for all the blood drives, he was there to support the volunteer fire department, he was there for the food collection, he was engaged in all sorts of ways that he used his business to help people. He was a great father, he was a good friend. The only thing is he had been divorced. And when the time came for his funeral, I wound up having it. But I was told that we could not have a mass because the man was divorced. And it would be, in essence, blessing a person whose life was not in accord with the rules of the Catholic Church. Now what happened is, we had the funeral, but we weren't supposed to have any music. That was the other thing. They said, it can't be a full funeral. We went ahead and had music and had the funeral because the realization was that even though there were other people, an older pastor, coming up with older regulations that they had been used to, we realized, we understood intimately that this would have been, first of all, no help and no consolation to the family at the time, and would have also injured people's faith because it would have been detrimental to how they believed the church should have acted at a time like that. It would have injured people's faith to see the church act that way. And so that's where you always have this give and take between what does the law say, what perhaps should be done in this case. I'll give you another quick example. There was a priest whose mother was not Catholic, his father was Catholic. In the days when they got married, the non-Catholic had to promise to have the child baptized and raised in the faith of the Catholic Church. Remember that? Now you don't have to do that anymore. What happens is the priest has to write down that he's explained why this is important and that the family should come to a fruitful decision in passing on the faith. But the non-Catholic party doesn't have to sign anything. At any rate, so the child was brought up and raised Catholic because it was the religion of the father. The father died. The son became a priest. At his ordination, his mother approached the communion line to receive communion from her son. The mother was not Catholic. They did not have intercommunion in the church. It was not allowed for someone who was not Catholic to come and receive communion. Guess what the son, the priest, did? He gave his mother communion. That's right. And everybody else knew, that's right, it's worth applauding, everybody else knew that this was his mother and she wasn't Catholic, but that was not a problem. And the reality was, at one time the priest said, I've talked to Mom about converting, but she would consider that to be a slap in the face to her parents who were really staunch Lutherans. And so there was no question of changing religions, but it was not a problem for her, so there was no reason for the church to make it a problem for the church. Now, if you're a gathering of bishops and you're trying to decide on, principles of unity, you may make the decision that here's the regulation. And in fact, if you go into a church and you see on the missalette, the back of the missalette, regulations for receiving communion, you've seen that, and it says if you're not Catholic, you shouldn't be approaching the altar. Also, those who are Catholic should not be guilty of serious sin. Well, remember the time when, before you went to church, the priests were in the confessionals on the side? You also remember that very few people went to communion back then? It's true. Now, things have changed. Does that mean that everybody who's coming to communion is completely blameless and innocent? No. Well, what does the law of the church say with regard to the need to go to confession prior to communion? Yes. If you're guilty of serious sin. Okay, but none of us get into the practice before communion in our regular masses of saying something like, and now as we prepare to come to communion, only those who are not guilty of serious sin should come forward. I'd like to try that sometime, though, and see who comes up. Let me go through a couple things so we can get to your questions. Discussion of devotion of Ministry of Bereavement and Pastoral Care, how that came. The discussion of the evolution of specific Catholic Church teachings, traditions, and rituals. Okay, we did that. By the way, in the funeral mass, you remember that even the social practices have changed. Remember a time where there would be 3 days of visitation? Of course. And remember when you would put the obituary notices in the paper for several days, and if Baltimore had more than one paper, you put them in several papers. Now, today, that's hardly done. There's 1 day of visitation. And the notices for the funerals are often sent out through social media rather than through obituary notices. There's a couple reasons for that, which we don't need to get into. You're probably well aware of them yourself. One of it is primarily is expense. In the days of visitation, when you had 3 days of being present to the people, there was a reason why you had 3 days. It took a while for word to get around, and you had to make sure that everybody knew, and so you didn't have a burial too quick. Also, there was the days where the rosary would be said almost constantly while the person was laying in state in the funeral home. Eventually, the church said, let's introduce some scripture into this, and that became the wake service, which was a scriptural service. Now, what happens now is when there's only 1 day of visitation, the wake service is beginning to disappear in practice because people want to have that afternoon and that evening as a time to receive guests and to interact with them. So we are seeing less and less requests for the wake service, just like less and less requests for the rosary when the wake service came in. In the old days, if you were a Knights of Columbus, they came and said the rosary. If you were a sodalist, they came and said the rosary. If you were a member of the Mother Society, they came and said the rosary. It was a way of people sharing their faith prayers with you. And what happened is the practice for that simply went away. And so we don't have it now to the extent that it was. So these rituals change. They come in and out of expression. Discussion of the Church's emphasis at funerals on eternal hope through the celebration of our Lord's resurrection, as well as the Church's acknowledgement of the preciousness of the deceased mortal life on earth and the suffering of loved ones as a result of the loss of that life. The Church's acknowledgement of our need for the expression of grief and loss and the Church's pastoral role in that healing. Now, let me show you an example of the old ritual and the new ritual for funerals. This happened in my family. I had a great uncle who was a Monsignor. And as Grandma, who they used to call Super Mima, because she was a saint, literally, took care of kids during the Depression and all sorts of problems when, and so anyway, so here is one of the things that he was saying. May Christ, who was crucified for your sake, free you from excruciating pain. May Christ, who died for you, free you from the death that never ends. May Christ, the Son of the living God, that's pretty much the way we read the prayers back then. May Christ, the Son of the living God, set you in the evergreen loveliness of his paradise, and may he, the true shepherd, recognize you as one of his own. May he free you from all your sins and assign you a place at his right hand and accompany the elect. Our Lord, receive your servant in the place of salvation, which he is hoping to receive from your mercy. Deliver your servant from all the dangers of hell, from constraining punishments, and from all distress. Deliver the soul of your servant from the death that on this world all must die. And my Aunt Fran, her daughter, began to go, Uncle Joe, stop it, stop it. And we were a very Catholic family, highly Catholic. What was being read was not speaking, to the final moments of grief. Conversely, something else happened at the bedside of my grandma who was dying. There was a priest who was a friend of my great-uncle, Monsignor Franz Joseph Deppy, Father Dewan. He was a Trinitarian. And he pulled out his breviary and was reading a prayer, and Grandma was actively dying. And my Aunt Fran, as she was keeping vigil, which the family had set up, she said, Father Dewan, what are you doing? He says, I'm praying my breviary, dear Fran. She says, would you say some of the prayers out loud? He says, of course. And he actually did have an Irish accent. And so he read some of the prayers out loud. Now, afterwards, after the burial, my Aunt Fran came to me and said, can you find those prayers? Those were the most beautiful prayers I ever heard. And I went to Father Dewan. I said, do you know what prayers you were reading? He says, of course, it's the Liturgy of the Hours. I could tell you exactly what prayers I said at what time of the day and what page they were on. And it's regulated. It's the same always. So definitely I can tell you what it is. And so I went and showed, and she said, that's not it, that's not it, that's not it, that's not it. And then I went and talked to him, and I said, we can't find it. He says, Jerry, he says, those were the prayers. He says, the thing is, under the circumstances that Aunt Fran was going through while her mother was dying in her presence, there was a grace that was given that illuminated those words beyond what she could recover under ordinary circumstances. At that moment, it spoke to her in a wonderful, marvelous way, far beyond the simple words that were on the paper. And he says that was a special moment, you know, that was given at that time, but probably cannot be repeated. So this is part of the way grace works and part of the way things work at funerals and in rituals. Discussion of St. John's guidelines honoring the deceased life eulogies. Well, I'll say one thing with regard to funerals. Here, this was the old one. Here's the new one. It's been this way for a while, actually. Into your hands, Father of mercies, we commend our sister in the sure and certain hope that together with all who have died in Christ, she shall rise with him on the last day. We give you thanks for the blessings which you bestowed upon her in this life. They are signs to us of your goodness and of our fellowship with the saints in Christ. Merciful Lord, turn toward us, listen to our prayers, open the gates of paradise to your servant, and help us who remain to comfort one another with assurances of faith until we all meet in Christ and are with you and with our sister forever through Christ our Lord. Another one for a baptized child who dies is, Lord Jesus, like a shepherd who gathers the lambs to protect them from all harm, you led this little one to the waters of baptism and shielded them in their innocence. Now carry this little one on the path to your kingdom of light, where she will find happiness and every tear will be wiped away. To you be glory now and forever. You didn't have the repeat of, from eternal death, save us, from death, save us, from our sins, save us. And that's the problem with the new church today. It's too easy on people. I asked somebody one time, and they were talking about the changes in the church, and they said, why all these changes? And I said, wait a minute, do you really believe that babies who weren't baptized wouldn't go to heaven and just drifted in limbo and didn't see God? And he'd say, well, no. I said, well, what about this other stuff? Like you go to hell for eating a hot dog on Friday or missing Mass on Sunday? And he said, well, it wasn't that bad, Father. It's not as bad as the way you make it sound. I said, well, did you believe all those things? That wasn't the point. I said, well, what was the point? He says, at least you knew where you stood. So there was a surety in the rigidity of the regulations. Do this and you shall live. Don't do that and you shall die. Or vice versa. General emphasis on grief. Grief is not a disease. It's a part of what makes us human. That we are connected to people beyond the bonds of physical life. We still have this connection. The church talks about the communion of the saints. In the rituals that we'll have at Mass, by the way, what time is it? Oh, can I tell 2 more stories? Hey, this isn't supposed to be over until, yeah, it's only 3:47. Okay, at 3:46 it says we have questions and answers. Okay, all right, so let me stop at this point. You can see where I'm going with this. Let me tell you some of the things that happen. When you try to take a strict, rigid approach towards this is in, this is out, you often fall short of the mark. For instance, you have the guideline, sacred hymns should be sung in church, right? If you're having a wedding in church, you're not going to sing Nobody Does It Better. That may, even if it's a favorite of the bride and groom. However, you might have, and in fact this does happen, that you have a song from a Broadway hit that talks about the enduring quality of married life. And so what has happened is, from West Side Story in the 50s, when Tony and Maria kneel to pledge their love to each other without benefit of church, they sing the song, make of our hands, make of our hearts one heart, day after day, one heart. Now it begins, now we start, one hand, one heart. And that's a sacred song, even though it's also secular. And so you could say, that's a secular song, we're not using it. But there would be no reason, legitimately speaking, to ban that. One final thing, there was a man who wanted to have, since we're on the topic of secular songs and non-sacred songs, He had died of cancer. He had a long, hard road in dying. And he was not a great churchgoer, but he loved Elvis Presley, and he gained strength from listening to Elvis Presley sing Amazing Grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Right? So they said, well, let's have it at the beginning. All right? They said, well, we can sing Amazing Grace. That's a church song. And they said, no, no. He listened to Elvis sing it, and nobody sang it like Elvis. And this gave him such strength when he would listen to that song that he forgot the pain. I said, okay, you can bring in the recording that he listened to, and we'll play it. And I said this, and I will end after this for the questions. I said to the person who was standing by press the button for the boombox, after I give the introduction, press the button. And I said, now, at this moment, we're going to draw near to this man's life by listening to a song that he heard many, many times when he was in the midst of excruciating and unremitting pain. The family told us how much it relieved his sense of loneliness and let him feel that God was close by. And I heard the button, bink, and then I heard this bing, and I recognized that that was not the note. That was the beginning of Elvis Presley singing Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace by Elvis Presley was on this album, and it was a segment of songs called American Trilogy. And so it was Amazing Grace, but two other songs. And the song that then came over the speaker in the church during the funeral was not Amazing Grace, it was, I wish I was in the land of cotton. And with that, I end.
Hi, Father. A liturgical question for you. If you die during Eastertide, do you still get an Old Testament reading instead of a reading from Acts?
Oh.
Or is that a Sunday-only rule?
You're able to pick whatever your readings are that would be appropriate at that time. Yeah, no, you're not limited to that. In fact, sometimes we have, instead of just one Old Testament and one New Testament, we have two Old Testaments or two New Testaments and then the Gospel. So whatever is speaking to the family, often, if they bring it forward. Typically speaking, most people pick up at the same readings. By the way, there was a reading that was always read at weddings, and it was, wives, be submissive to your husbands as if to the Lord, because the husband is head of the house, just as Christ is head of the church. That was read at every wedding. Guess what? It's not being read anymore for some reason.
Hymns that are read, the meditation hymn and the final hymn, are you allowed to select what you'd like that to be?
Yes, pretty much. Unless it's something like...
I want Ave Maria.
Oh, Ave Maria is one that's often done. Absolutely. Oddly enough, there was a time where Ave Maria was suggested not to be sung at weddings. I mean, not Ave Maria, I'm sorry. Where you would not have a Marian hymn as a meditation during Mass because the emphasis is supposed to be on Christ. And so you can see how sometimes well-intentioned approaches cannot encapsulate every moment successfully. Also, that you weren't supposed to have "Here Comes the Bride," because it was a secular song and it accompanied a rape scene in *Midsummer Night's Dream*. Many of you don't know that. But that's played in church all the time, and nobody knows that some arcane soul came up with that knowledge, and all the brides are thinking is, my mom came down the aisle to this, my grandma came down the aisle to this. That's why they say you can negotiate with a terrorist but not a liturgist.
What are the latest rules with regard to cremation and being buried in a Catholic cemetery and scattering ashes or anything regarding that?
That's actually fairly intricate. There's a difference between the laws of the state of Maryland with regard to cremation and the scattering of ashes. You've heard Linda speak about the fact that the church preference is that after cremation, the ashes should be kept intact, in one place, and then be buried fairly quickly. The reality is that people will share ashes, and they'll even, divide them up in little lockets to give people, or they'll have, grandpa sitting on the mantelpiece until the time comes when grandma dies, and then the ashes will be intermingled and laid in the family plot. That's not a sin to do that, but it goes against the regulation where the church is concerned about a respectful disposition of the body or the bodily remains. And so that sometimes happens when you find out, for instance, that after grandma dies, the family goes through the house, clearing the house out, and they find grandpa not in an honored place on the mantle, but in a Maxwell House coffee can in the back of the closet. And I didn't make that up. So the church will always emphasize the preference, but in terms of cremation, your family makes that decision. The Vatican police are not going to be coming looking after you, and you have far more leeway in the state of Maryland and in funeral homes than what might happen in church. And since you're making the disposition of those ashes, the church only has contact with them if they're being interred or if they're being brought into church. The rest is really your decision. Is that helpful? Now, I can't write the rules, but I can tell you what the rule is, and then I say that, but there are different ways people under grief and it's seeking consolation adapt these customs, which tend to be repeated time and time again because they work. I knew someone that had some of the locks of hair from her daughter who had died. Now, technically speaking, that should have been buried, but who cares? In order to say that, that's wrong, you're not supposed to do that. No, it's a great memento.
Thank you, Father Jerry.
So I'm going to start with the formal script, and then I'm going to go a little bit off. Our program will conclude in just a few minutes with Father Jerry, but we wish to thank you all so much for coming and to say thank you to all of our panelists who volunteered their time, expertise, and effort for us today. Before Father Jerry leads us in prayer, please take 1 minute to complete our program evaluations so we can learn what has worked for you today and also how we can improve our program in the future. Please leave your evaluations turned upside down on your seats and we will collect them. And don't forget to pick up your free handouts and printed resources in the church lobby. Please take what you need, and also those on the front row. These are from our speakers. And yes, the date is wrong on the eval, so on the top, just cross it out and put May 7th. That was a copying thing. We just had plenty of copies. But I'm going to add a little bit here. I hope you don't mind my going off script. But I have been a Boy Scout mother for years, and I was a volunteer for years, and my husband is a council commissioner. And the one thing I learned in all my years of scouting is you always recognize your volunteers. And so because we're at the end of our program, I just wanted to take time to do that. So I'm going to start with my team. Eileen, who had not planned to be on the team, but when we needed someone who understood the current church processes, she jumped in, and she's been invaluable and as her insight into the way things currently work. Joe Schaefer. Joe is the calming voice on our team. There are 3 powerful women, myself, Ronnie, and Barbara. And when we get into our discussions, Joe is the one that we can say, okay, what do you think? And then he comes up with usually the statement that embodies what we're all three saying in a different way. He's also been the person who's been helping me carry things out of this building after every workshop, and that is greatly appreciated. Barbara has not been here for the panelists, but if you attended the workshop, she knows she was a vital part of the workshop. And she has, her experience brought a wealth of knowledge as far as helping prepare a lot of the materials that you've seen us produce for this program. And then there's Ronnie, my backbone. Ronnie has been, has put almost as much time and effort into this program as I have. She has been a mainstay as far as jumping in and providing a tremendous amount of support, and her knowledge has been invaluable. We're both very different personalities, and we get on each other's nerves. But I think we really appreciate each other, and we've learned how to work together, and it's been a wonderful life lesson. I also have to offer thanks for my support structure, because Bert didn't sign up for this, as Father Jerry has said to him many times, but he's been lugging things in every weekend and lugging things out and running videos and doing whatever is needed. And he's sitting out there going, oh. Also, our parish staff, who did not sign up to help either, but Shirley has helped with the budget. Patty has helped every single time. If there's a day I can't get in and need extra copies, she's jumped in to help me. The announcements, the newsletters, all of those things have been with the help of Patty in the office. And Jan and Mike Shaw have helped us in getting these facilities. And it's not easy to juggle schedules to get the facilities here at Oakland Mills, so they've been wonderful. But my final thanks go to our priests, and then I will end. Our priests have been phenomenal in their support for this program. There are many churches who've tried and failed, and every one of them will tell you the reason it failed was because they did not get their clergy behind it. Their clergy didn't do the talks at Mass. Their clergy didn't come. Their clergy didn't say, oh, I think this is important. And in this parish, every single priest has done just that. And even Padre Leandro is running a Spanish workshop in September. So we have been thoroughly blessed. And we have Father Jerry has already agreed to a plan to present a program slightly different and adapted for next year to include all the necessary topics. So I can't say thank you enough, because so many people do not get the kind of support that I received in trying to run this effort, and I am just overwhelmed at that support. So thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Father Jerry.
We could stand for this. I mean, literally. This was the prayer of Blessed John Henry Newman. It's often used at funerals. O Lord, support us all the day long of this troublous life, until the shadows lengthen and the evening comes, and the busy world is hushed, and the fever of life is over, and our work is done. Then, Lord, in thy mercy, grant us a safe lodging, a holy rest, and peace at the last. Amen.